Hello, everybody. Evan Grant from the Dallas Morning News and SportsDayDFW.com here again with another Rangers report to be named later. Hey, how about that? The report to be named later. We'll go with that for this week. Really, the name doesn't matter as long as we get into a lot of free agency talk, and we will talk about that. We'll talk about the Rangers' 24-hour spending spree that resulted in $561 million in commitments, mostly to Corey Seager. I will be calling him Kyle, or starting to call him Kyle on many occasions. We'll just have to get used to this. Marcus Semien, John Gray, and Cole Calhoun. They've spent $561 million so far, or committed to it, pending physicals on these guys. There could be more money spent, and we'll get into that and how they might spend it. And I've also got another viewer question. Thank you guys for responding to requests for questions. Just remember, you can either send a question to me at Evan_P_Grant on Twitter, or leave it in the comments on this YouTube channel, or you can always email it to me at egrant@dallasnews.com. If you happen to run into me on the street, you can pass me a note. So whatever you want to do. Anyway, let's get to the last 24 hours or 36 hours as I start to record this on early Wednesday morning. This period started with the Rangers agreeing to a 7-year, $175 million deal with Marcus Semien. And in short order, the Rangers had added Cole Calhoun on a 1-year deal, John Gray on a 4-year deal, and then the Whopper, and really a surprise, Corey Seager on a 10-year, $325 million deal. They've remade the middle of their infield, and let's go into some of those moves and some ramifications. What's become clear to me over the last 18 hours is that as the Rangers did enter into free agency, that Seager and Semien were at the top of their list. I think that Semien really was the portal to other deals in a number of ways. Number one, if you convince a player of Marcus Semien's caliber to come to Texas and join a team that had lost 102 games last year. Doing that is no small feat. There's not a long history of 100-loss teams wooing top-tier free agents. But in addition to that, if you get a guy like Semien who's so well-respected throughout the game, I think it makes other players kind of pay attention to what you're doing in free agency. It's not going to make players take a discount, not going to make players take less money, but it is going to give players an idea that, hey, it's okay. They're serious. This team really wants to play ball. And the other thing that I think really made a lot of sense about Marcus Semien is because he could play second base and because he could go back to shortstop, it gave the Rangers some flexibility that if they signed him, they could do whatever they needed to in the infield. And if they didn't hit on anybody in the infield, they could move other places and still be okay in the middle infield. So getting Marcus to agree to the deal that they did, that Chris Young and John Daniels and Chris Woodward all convinced him to take, really was a big stepping stone. And I think the biggest stepping stone there was the 7th year. Most projections that I saw for Semien had him getting about $25 million a year, but it was on a 5 or 6 year deal. And I think that's, for lack of a better term, the tax the Rangers had to pay, or the penalty they had to pay for those 5 consecutive losing seasons, is to get a free agent to be the first to commit. They were going to have to pay a penalty. And that penalty was in the form of an extra year on a contract. But it got Marcus Semien to commit, and it just allowed the Rangers to start moving in many different directions very quickly. Cole Calhoun is not a huge signing. It's a $5 million deal. He's a platoon outfielder at this point. But he and Semien and John Gray and lastly Corey Seager, God, I'm going to do it every time, all fit the Rangers' blueprint of what they're looking for in a championship player. And in particular, that I think we highlight that with Semien and with Seager. Semien is a guy who made himself into an elite level defender. He has finished third in the MVP voting in the American League twice in the last 3 years. After he did not get the long-term deal that he wanted from Oakland, he bet on himself and accepted a one-year deal with Toronto and changed positions for 2021, and then went out and had a career best year. All of that kind of says this is the kind of player who sets a tone in a clubhouse and on a field, and that's the reputation Marcus has had throughout baseball. In some regards, I kind of compared it on the MLB radio network this evening to the deal that Andre Dawson bet on himself on when he gave the Chicago Cubs a blank check made out to him and let them fill in the amount in 1987 as a free agent. He wasn't getting a ton of offers. He simply wanted to go out and prove to himself, and he bet on himself. And that's, I think, what Semien did in some ways with Toronto over this past year. And here it is, it's paid off. And Dawson, after that 1987 contract, won the MVP and really kind of set the tone for who Andre Dawson would be over the latter half of his career, which was a team leader, hugely respected throughout all of baseball. And eventually a Hall of Famer. I don't know if Semien will go on to be a Hall of Famer, but the first two precedents are certainly there. As far as Seager goes, the things that I think were involved here are the Rangers' vision for the future, clearly. Obviously, being willing to go to $325 million. But I think the relationship that Chris Woodward had with Corey Seager previously in Los Angeles certainly played a factor. I think that Chris Young and John Daniels were very upfront with the representative, Scott Boras, and held their ground on what they were willing to do, how far they were willing to go. And this thing kind of took on a life of its own. I did not expect the number of guys with qualifying offers to sign with clubs that have before the likely MLB work stoppage or lockout that will probably hit on Wednesday evening. Just didn't seem like a very prudent deal for clubs to be willing to give up a draft pick to go with as compensation for those guys. And here the Rangers are, having given up second and third round picks to sign Seager and Semien, both of whom got qualifying offers. And I think this also kind of took on a life of its own when the Los Angeles Angels went out and signed Noah Syndergaard and really opened up the floodgates on the pitching market. And I think all of baseball kind of acted in a frenzy. Players and agents saw that there was a deadline, maybe not to free agency, but a deadline before the collective bargaining agreement expired. And there's nothing to kickstart a negotiation period like a looming deadline in baseball. And that's what happened. The teams just got carried, I don't want to say carried away, but teams decided that they needed to act and act now to get guys in the fold. And so the Rangers, in that regard, the Rangers reacted, and they reacted quickly and decisively. In Seager, the Rangers are getting a 27-year-old. I don't know if he's going to be a long-term shortstop or if he will eventually move to another position in the infield. There's some chatter about that in the long term, but in the short term, he is the best or second best offensive shortstop in all of baseball. His 865 career OPS at shortstop is second only over the last 6 years to Fernando Tatis Jr., and he's had 1,500 more plate appearances than Tatis. So he's played considerably more. He has performed at a high level despite a couple of injuries. He has played in 3 World Series. He's been a Rookie of the Year. He's been a MVP finalist, finishing 3rd in 2016. He's familiar with the vision that Chris Woodward wants to set for this team. And so all of those things, again, fit not just the Rangers' willingness to spend money, but to find the blueprint this club was trying to set for a championship culture. And that's kind of at the heart of where I think the Rangers are right now. Is we will all get caught up in $561 million because it's a record that for a single free agent off season for any team ever. But the Rangers identified guys that they felt fit with their vision for the future, and were willing to act on them. This was not simply a case of looking to hand money out and finding guys to take it. This was the Rangers acting on guys they had identified. So where do we go from here? A couple quick thoughts. This decision leaves Isiah Kiner-Falefa out in the cold a little bit. I think the Rangers will have to decide if he fits best as a utility guy. Could potentially go back to third base for 2022. And I think it ups the bar for what Josh Young is going to have to do to win the third base job in spring training. I think Josh has done everything the Rangers could ask for to give himself a chance to win the third base job, but he's going to have to compete now with Isiah Kiner-Falefa instead of, say, a veteran placeholder like a Brock Holt or a Charlie Culberson to win that job. It also opens up the possibility that maybe the Rangers would consider trading Kiner-Falefa to a team that's looking for a shorter-term deal and a shortstop who is perhaps considered more defensive-oriented. And the New York Yankees are a team that comes to mind in that regard. The Yankees are trying to stay under some salary caps, some luxury tax thresholds, as we call it in baseball. In Kiner-Falefa, there is a guy who has 2 more years before free agency. I think his projected salary in arbitration for 2022 is about $4.5 million. So he's affordable for a team. And so that's something the Rangers might explore as well. Whether they do or don't, I'm babbling here. It's been a long couple of days. But whether or not the Rangers do trade Kiner-Falefa, they've got perhaps the strongest middle infield in the game right now, starting middle infield with Semien and Seager. And listen, the possibility continues to exist that the Rangers are not done in the infield. Oakland has expressed interest or expressed willingness to teams to listen on some of its players, particularly first baseman Matt Olson. And the Rangers now have some extra capital in terms of prospects in Justin Foscue that they could potentially offer to Oakland in a package deal for Matt Olson. And in across the way, whether they've got Young or Kiner-Falefa, they've got an advanced hitter or a Gold Glove winning third baseman, and they could legitimately go into 2022 with the best infield in all of baseball. Now, it doesn't say that they're the best team in all of baseball, and this is a team still with significant holes. For me, particularly in the starting rotation, John Gray does give them some innings, but there's a lot of unproven guys after him. Dane Dunning with 117 innings in 2021 is probably the closest thing to a proven commodity, and I thought Dane had a good rookie year, but he's got a long way to go. The Rangers are certainly still open to the idea of Clayton Kershaw moving from Los Angeles to Texas. And again, the Seager signing or the Seager deal, along with Max Scherzer going from the Dodgers to the New York Mets on Monday, all of that could potentially weigh on Clayton's choice on whether or not he views the Dodgers still as a slam dunk playoff team, or whether he views the Rangers now as much more of an up-and-coming team that might be in position to contend at least for a playoff spot, depending on how big the playoff field is in 2022, and be willing to and be in position to really have a chance to go deep into the playoffs in 2023. So I don't think the Rangers are through this winter. I think there's certainly an extra budget for Kershaw, and perhaps Kershaw alone. But I also think beyond all of that, the Rangers may consider looking at an outfielder. Seiya Suzuki, coming over from Japan, remains a guy who would have a lot of interest for the Rangers. He does not swing and miss, and he's athletic. I wouldn't rule the Rangers out on Chris Taylor or Michael Conforto or Kyle Schwarber as either. They have committed about $76 million to the 2022 payroll with the free agent additions that they're about to make. And they could add another outfielder and keep it under $100 million. And then if Kershaw does decide that he could come, I think that the Rangers would push that up, by $110, $115 million over where they were in 2021. So that's it on report. I do want to get to one question from Nate Griffith, who was kind enough to ask us a question about Seiya Suzuki. Nate asked if the Rangers' relationship in Japan that led to them signing Yu Darvish would have an impact or give them an edge on Suzuki. And listen, I think that the Rangers have worked hard to establish a relationship in Japan, and they have a good reputation over there, and they are very much involved with players who come from over there with a long track record that goes beyond Darvish. They signed Colby Lewis, or re-signed Colby Lewis, Tony Barnett, most recently Kohei Arihara, who is coming back from an injury. And so I think all of that helps, but the Japanese market is no longer simply about relationships. The posting process has changed. It's now basically a full free agent negotiation in which a player has 30 days to negotiate with any team that he wants. Once he signs with that team, there is a posting fee that's calculated based on a percentage of the contract that player signs that goes to his former team. And so that takes a lot of the leverage that Japanese teams had out of the mix. The interesting thing about Suzuki is he was posted at the start of this week, last week. He has about 7 days until the potential shutdown that would occur at 11:59 Eastern Time on Wednesday, December 1st. If baseball shuts down at that point in time, when his ability to negotiate with teams would be frozen, and it would reactivate for the remainder of a 30-day window once baseball reaches a CBA. So that would be very much up in the air, and it might make it more difficult on Suzuki at that point in time if baseball has a lockout that runs into February, and teams are trying to get to camp quickly and wrap up business with guys that they know. Might leave Suzuki a little bit out in the cold. Might not give him enough time to visit enough clubs that he'd like to visit with in person. But I think that's somebody the Rangers at least are doing due diligence on and continuing to investigate. And that's about all I've got. I realize that my cadence has been a little bit slow here tonight and early this morning. I'm still kind of trying to get my head around what the Rangers have done over the last 36 hours. But they said they weren't going to take any half measures this winter. I think they've made that very clear. They have changed the dynamic of this club greatly, and they aren't done yet. So hopefully next week I'll be back with more energy, and hopefully we'll have baseball to talk about and not a work stoppage, because nothing will kill a video report like labor talk. So until then, thanks everybody.